It started like most summer mornings by the lake, quiet, calm, the kind of silence that makes you forget the world beyond the trees even exists. The mist still hung over the surface, rolling low across the water as if it wanted to keep the lake's secrets hidden. I liked mornings like this. The air smelled of pine, the water was still enough to reflect the sky like glass, and all I had was a fishing rod in one hand and my dog lying at my feet on the dock. But peace never lasts long when someone like her is around. Karen. I didn't know her name at first. Not until much later, when her reputation had already reached me through whispers and complaints from the few neighbors who were willing to talk about her. But I had already seen her, strutting around the neighborhood like she owned the place, barking orders at landscapers, peering through blinds, clutching her little HOA binder like it was a badge of authority. And this morning, my first real morning on the dock of my new lake property, was the morning she decided to introduce herself. I had just cast my line when I heard the sound. High heels clicking against the wooden planks of the dock, each step sharp, irritated, impatient. My dog, a German shepherd named Ranger, perked his ears and gave a low growl. I didn't blame him. You there! Her voice was sharp enough to slice through the calm. I looked over my shoulder, and there she was. Bright floral dress, hair pinned too tightly, face already flushed red with indignation. She was pointing at me like I'd committed some crime. No fishing here. Didn't you see the sign? I blinked, more confused than anything. There wasn't a single sign on my property. I'd walked it carefully when I bought it, front to back, shoreline to treeline. No markers, no rules, nothing that said what I could or couldn't do on my own dock. This lake, she snapped, is for HOA members only. You can't just set up here like you own the place. I let her words hang in the air for a moment. Calm, deliberate. I turned my gaze back to the water, let the reel spin a little, and then finally looked her in the eye. I do own this place, I said quietly. That made her flinch, like the idea hadn't even crossed her mind. She adjusted her dress, straightened her shoulders, and marched closer. That's not how it works. The HOA controls the lake. Everyone who owns property here must join the association. That means you follow our rules. No exceptions. There it was. The pitch. The demand. I had expected it sooner or later. But something about her tone, like she wasn't asking. She was declaring, made my patience slip. I never signed anything, I replied. And I don't plan to. Her mouth fell open slightly. For someone who thrived on control, that answer was like striking a match in a dry field. I could almost see the fire catch in her eyes. You don't have a choice, she snapped. Everyone pays dues. Everyone abides by the HOA. If you think you're special, you're not. I'll make sure of it. I leaned back, resting my elbows on the dock, calm as ever. Ranger let out a low, warning growl, and she instinctively stepped back a pace. You're trespassing, she spat. If you don't comply, I'll call the police. The irony made me laugh under my breath. I wasn't trespassing. I was sitting on my own dock, on land I'd purchased outright with papers to prove it. But people like her don't want to hear reason. They want submission. They want obedience. So I shrugged. Call them. Her eyes narrowed, her lips pressed into a thin line. And then, without another word, she spun on her heel and stormed off down the dock, heels clacking like warning shots. Ranger watched her until she disappeared between the trees. Then, for the first time that morning, I felt the stillness break, because I knew she wasn't bluffing, and I knew this was only the beginning. Oh, the cops arrived 20 minutes later. The sound of gravel crunching under tires carried across the lake. I didn't move, didn't reel in my line, just kept my gaze steady on the water as a squad car rolled to a stop. Near the edge of the property, the officer stepped out, hands on his belt, expression already weary. Not angry, not aggressive, just tired. The kind of tired that comes from answering calls like this one too many times. Behind him, storming out of her car in a whirlwind of perfume and indignation, was Karen. There! She cried, pointing at me as if she'd just caught a fugitive. That's the man! He's fishing illegally. He refuses to pay HOA dues. Arrest him! The officer raised a hand, silencing her for the moment. Then he turned his attention to me. Morning, sir, he said. Calm, measured. Mind if I ask you to come over here a minute? I sighed, set the rod down, and stood. Ranger patted at my side, his eyes never leaving Karen. I walked up the dock slowly, deliberately, as if I had all the time in the world. "Everything all right?" I asked. "That depends," the officer replied. He glanced at Karen, then back at me. "This lady says you're trespassing on private property and violating HOA rules." Karen folded her arms smugly, already smiling like she'd won. I pulled my wallet from my back pocket, flipped it open, and handed the officer a folded deed. "That's my property. Bought it outright. The dock, the shoreline, all of it. I'm not trespassing. I'm at home." The officer took his time reading the document. Karen leaned forward, trying to peek over his shoulder. "This is ridiculous," she hissed. "Everyone pays. Everyone joins. He's lying. He has to be." But the officer shook his head. "This deed's legit. His name's on it. Looks like he owns this land, including the dock." Karen's jaw dropped. No. You don't understand. The HOA controls the lake. He has to join. He can't just—" The officer held up a hand. "Ma'am, HOA agreements are voluntary unless specifically written into a property's deed. If it's not in there, he's not obligated." Her face flushed crimson. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. Words tumbled out, incoherent, furious. "That's not how this works. You don't know this community. You don't know me." The officer gave her a long, steady look. "You're right. I don't, but I do know the law, and the law says he's free to fish on his own property." I met her glare with silence. Not anger, not gloating, just silence. And that silence burned her more than any words I could have said. For the first time since she marched down that dock, Karen was speechless. The officer handed me back my deed, tipped his head politely, and started back toward his car. But Karen wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. Over the next few days, the quiet I had hoped for by the lake dissolved into chaos. It started small. Notes slipped under my door. Typed in bold font, "Join the HOA or face consequences." Then came the emails. Threats of fines, warnings of legal action, empty promises of lawsuits that never came. And then the neighbors. Some avoided me entirely, whispering behind their blinds when I walked by. Others stopped me at the mailbox, nervous, apologetic. "Karen's been saying things," they whispered. "That you're dangerous. That you don't respect the rules. That you'll bring down property values." The smear campaign had begun. But what she didn't, no, what she couldn't have, imagined was that she was picking a fight she couldn't win. Because Karen wasn't just my neighbor, she was my tenant. And soon enough, she was going to remember that. The thing about people like Karen is they live in illusions. They build kingdoms out of paper rules, and they enforce them with the loudest voice they can muster. But kingdoms like that always crumble when reality cuts through, and reality was about to hit her like a freight train. The day after the police left, I sat at my desk with a stack of files. Rental agreements, property deeds, lease renewals, all the details of the homes I owned scattered across this neighborhood. Most tenants paid on time, most respected the lease. Most lived quietly, grateful for the space. Except one tenant who had been late 3 months in a row, always with excuses about community projects and unexpected expenses. One tenant who thought she could bully her neighbors into submission, while ignoring the paper she signed with me. Karen. Her name stared back at me from the lease agreement. The same woman who stormed my dock. The same woman who called the cops. The same woman who tried to paint me as some outsider trespassing on my own land. She wasn't just a neighbor. She was my renter. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile tugging at my lips. She had no idea. That evening, just as the sun dipped behind the tree line, I heard shouting across the lake. Karen again. She was berating a landscaper, telling him he'd trimmed her hedges unevenly. Her voice carried over the water, shrill, commanding, impossible to ignore. I walked down to the dock, Ranger at my side, and cast another line, calm, patient, waiting. It didn't take long. The sound of heels on wood, the sharp tone of her voice. "You again!" she spat, storming onto my dock. "Didn't the officer tell you? You may have papers, but you can't live here without HOA approval. We'll fine you, and if you don't pay, we'll take action." I didn't look at her. Just let the reel spin and clicked it into place. "You really like this lake, don't you?" Her brow furrowed. "What?" "The water, the view, the dock." I finally looked at her, calm as ever. It's nice, isn't it? Makes all the yelling worth it. She blinked, thrown off by my tone. Don't play games with me. I built this community. People respect me. They follow me. You think you can hide behind some deed, but you'll see, I always win. I stood then, slowly, deliberately. Ranger rose with me, silent, watchful. I turned fully toward her and let the weight of my words sink. You don't win here, Karen, not against me, because this isn't just my lake. I paused, letting the silence stretch. It's your landlord's. The color drained from her face. What? What are you talking about? I pulled a folded copy of her lease from my pocket, crisp, clean, signed. I held it up where she couldn't miss it. This, I said quietly, is the agreement you signed. With me, I own your house. Every brick, every nail, every blade of grass in your yard. You don't just live in this neighborhood, Karen, you live under my roof. Her jaw worked soundlessly, her hands trembling at her sides. For the first time, she wasn't yelling. She wasn't commanding. She was cornered. That's not possible, she stammered. You can't, no, you... But I stepped closer, my voice low and steady. You called the cops on your landlord. You tried to bully your landlord. You threatened fines, lawsuits, eviction on the very man who can end your lease with a single piece of paper. Ranger growled, the sound rumbling low in his throat. Karen flinched. You think you control this lake, I finished. But the truth is, you don't even control your own home. The days that followed were strangely quiet. Karen disappeared from the streets. No more patrols with her binder. No more confrontations at the mailbox. No more shrill commands to neighbors. She shut her blinds, stayed indoors, and for the first time, the neighborhood seemed at peace. But I wasn't done, because the damage she'd caused couldn't be erased with silence. She had smeared my name, spread lies, poisoned the well of this community, and I wasn't about to let her slip away without facing consequences. So I filed the paperwork, not for eviction, not yet. That was too easy, too quick. No, I filed a notice of lease violation, late payments, harassment of neighbors, abuse of property, every line backed by documentation, every claim fortified by signatures and dates. It wasn't personal. It was business. Cold, sharp, final. And Karen knew it. The next time I saw her was 2 weeks later. She was at her mailbox, fumbling with a stack of letters, when she saw me walking Ranger down the street. Her face paled. Her hands shook. She dropped half the envelopes. I stopped, met her eyes, and said nothing. Just a nod. A reminder. Her glare flickered, weak, trembling. And then she looked away. For the first time, Karen had no words. But people like her don't change. They adapt. They scheme. It was a Saturday when she tried one last stunt. A community meeting. She gathered half a dozen neighbors in her yard, waving papers, shouting about illegal ownership and corruption. She pointed at my house, her voice rising above the crowd. He's not one of us, she cried. He's a fraud. He thinks he can control us, but we won't let him. The neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Some avoided her eyes. Others whispered, doubt creeping in. That's when I stepped forward, lease in hand, deeds stacked neatly in a folder, calm, collected. Let's clear this up, I said, loud enough for all to hear. I laid the papers on the hood of a car. Property deeds, titles, lease agreements. Proof that half the houses surrounding this lake, including hers, belonged to me. The crowd hushed. Karen's face drained of color. This neighborhood doesn't belong to an HOA, I said. It doesn't belong to one person's rules. It belongs to the people who live here, and some of those people live in homes I own. Including her! I pointed at Karen. Gasps rippled through the group. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Nothing came out. You can follow her, I continued, or you can follow the truth. Either way, I don't need approval. I don't need permission, and I don't need her HOA. The silence that followed was heavy, and then, one by one, neighbors began to turn away from her. Some left quietly. Others shook their heads, muttering under their breath. Karen stood frozen, alone in her own yard, her empire crumbling at her feet. That night, as I sat on the dock with Ranger, the lake calm and still once more, I thought about how quickly illusions fall apart. Karen tried to force me into her rules. She tried to weaponize power she never truly had. She tried to control what she didn't own. But the truth was simple. She was never in control, and now She knew it. The lake was mine. The house she lived in was mine. And the silence that returned to this neighborhood was mine too. All because she made one mistake. She forgot who her landlord was,